As a kid, I really just was a kid of nature. It's Brooklyn. I grew up very country. I was just surrounded by farms, fields, and forests. And I actually never expected that I would be here in the city. This is a little bit of my humble abode in Brooklyn, New York. This is my kitchen. It's maybe hard to see through all the leafage, but I really love my kitchen space. This is a place where I spend a lot of my time because I do like to cook. I've been in this space for about 15 years now, and so just had to really work with it. But you could see it's a sensible setup. I mean, my refrigerator is right here, and I could turn around and start cutting. Like I have this big celery root, this celeriac. You move this, and imagine chop, 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 chop. Here's my compost. I could set it right there, pull it right out, put that into the freezer, and wait until the compost pick up. When the plants get really big here, that's when they kind of start moving over into the sink, and then it's hard to actually do the dishes. So the tallest plant right now is actually, believe it or not, my Begonia metallica. Beautiful, right? You'll see that I just have plants all around me. My Hoya Bella is actually in bloom, has this really powdery smell. You'll see that there was an inflorescence here beginning again, but I don't know if it fell off or not. But yeah, so you can see that that's in bloom. So this area is my living space. You can see that this is a little bit more of an open floor plan. So the kitchen kind of goes into the dining room kind of goes into the living room, and the living room kind of goes over into the bedroom. I've started to bring plants into here probably now 11 years ago.
My dad's coming over this morning, and we're going to build an herb garden in my kitchen on this wall. Hold it up for me. Quite obsessive about plants, so if I see a blank wall in my house, I get a little anxious and I want to cover it in some form of plant life.
This is just actually using gutters, and you'll see that we amended it a little bit with these iron holders right here, which is another way in order to be able to create space on the vertical space that you're using.
We were joking the other day, my friend and I, that my house is turning more into a green womb every day.
I think I have a little over 1,100 plants in my home right now. There's always plants coming and going. I don't think I really thought about how many plants I could originally fit in my apartment. Once you start to bring plants into your life, you kind of know what you were missing out on, because it can be so pleasant, especially if you don't think of them just as decor. I began bringing plants into my house when my roommate moved out, and I just realized how much of a shift it had, not only on my attitude, but also just the way that, you know, it looks inside my home. And so I started with my first plant, which was a fiddle leaf fig, a Ficus lyrata. So this was my initial fig that I got 15 years ago. It was a lot larger than what it is now. Welcome to the part of my workroom that I call Fig Forest. Of course, it didn't start off as a forest. This Ficus lyrata that you see behind me, I got about 7 years ago, probably going on 8 years ago now. And when I got it, it was about 3 to 4 feet high. And now, you know, you can imagine it's 10-foot high ceilings here, so it's about 14 feet high at this stage. But I cut it back by about 2/3 because my home was actually going under construction, and the construction workers kept on bumping into it. And fiddle leaf figs hate getting bumped into, so I ended up cutting it back by quite a lot. And I've now put it a little bit more into the interior of my space because it was like hogging all of the light from the windows. It's not as big as I really had it before, which makes me a little sad, but it's starting to grow back again. So hopefully in another few years, it'll start to become a beast again. I have like little outbreaks of mealybugs around my house, but particularly on this pothos is something that I'm really concerned about. And I was tipped off to it first, not actually by the pothos, but by my Schefflera up here, which started to turn yellow very quickly. So my first step is to quarantine this, so I'm going to put it into my shower. I'm going to actually get my hose. I've assembled a 150-foot hose in my house in order to be able to help with things like this and also water my plants. Now this doesn't have a lot of pressure, but it has some pressure. And so what I'm gonna do is, you'll see there might be like some white here, and you just spray it down. And that might actually knock down some of the mealybug population naturally, without any chemicals or anything like that. As a kid, we were always out in the garden. We would compost. I mean, it was kind of like second nature. And I think that as I grew older, it made me realize that what I really wanted to do was to connect people back to nature.
You know, they actually usually tip over like this, but that's a blue death feigning beetle. We have like millipedes.
And so when I went to school actually for environmental science and entomology, which is a study of bugs.
Which is not technically an insect, it's an arthropod.
How long do they live for?
You know, it varies. They could live for a year, 2 years, even sometimes 3 years. My favorite kind, unfortunately, you can't even bring into the United States anymore. I used to love raising these black African millipedes, and they were like 11 inches long.
What is that?
That's a Madagascar hissing cockroach.
Oh my goodness.
So that hiss is actually, they blow air out of their anus.
I started getting interested in university and higher education, and I know higher education is not for everybody. So it was really a dream of mine, and was not something that my parents were able to do. I ended up picking up entomology because the professors who I met there were just so passionate about their subject. I got a lot of research grant scholarships. I've been very grateful in getting some environmental scholarships. And then I took out loans, and I did so many work-study positions. I started to look into the world of fashion, which was actually never an industry that appealed to me. I mean, I grew up with like my mom's National Geographic, so I didn't grow up with fashion magazines, but I entered into the fashion industry as a model. And I started to explore, I would say around 2000, 2001, about whether this concept of sustainability was even being talked about in the world of fashion. And honestly, it was like few and far between of people that were exploring this avenue of like, wait, yes, our clothes have an impact too, an environmental and a human impact. So can we actually tell stories through that way? I eventually signed on with an agency and shared with them, I'm like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm working only with brands that satisfy my values. So I wrote a book on sustainable fashion and beauty. I started the company, Source for Style. I started to work with a lot of different brands, helping them source and creative direct their brand as it relates to sustainability. It began to occur to me that not everybody felt the same way about the environment as I had felt.
Yeah, good job, Kitty. Good job, Kitty. Such a star.
She is.
And I think that's how I found myself in the city, is it started to really encourage me to appeal to people who might not have this kind of connection to nature as I had, and to meet people where they're at. I've been here for 13 years, and every time I walk down the street with Kippy, everyone's like, I remember hens from my hometown.
Come on, come on. Oh, come on, come on, girls. Come here. Come. Come. Yes.
So I had chickens growing up when I was a kid. I don't remember taking care of them as much because I think it's something that falls on the shoulders of your parents.
I love you. I love you.
But I was in the community garden a few years back and somebody had set one of those terrible, inhumane glue traps for rats.
They're like, I want
and I happened upon an oven bird that fell onto one of the traps. And so I ended up taking it up to the Wild Bird Fund. And while I was there, there was this little chicken. Kippy. There you go. And I just kind of fell in love with this little chicken. And I think the folks there recognized it. And they asked me if I wanted to foster this little red hen. And so I thought about this for like 2 weeks. And that's how Kippy came into my life. So I was going to repot some plants this morning, but I think Kippy might need to lay an egg. She gets really ornery in the morning when she needs to lay an egg. Got some new ones in. Okay, let's see. This is Hoya linearis, which is a very hard one to come by. Kippy's looking to lay an egg. I'm actually going to put this back into the other room because this will fit nicely on that shelf. She only lived to about 3 years. She unfortunately laid an egg on the inside and it invited a bacteria infection, but she and I were like the bestest of friends. So this is my bedroom, and actually this is where Kippy used to sleep. Some people may ask, how do you have a chicken sleeping up here? And basically this door, it has a little latch in the back so it doesn't move. And then this came out and I would have another towel right here. And this is basically her poop hammock. So she would poop in here at night. Probably not as sanitary as some people would want, but I've seen a lot of chicken poop in my life and it doesn't faze me that much. And she used to just sleep right up here and watch me. I would watch her go to bed and she would watch me go to bed. She had basically the highest roost in the house. Something about New York and Brooklyn is that people throw out a lot of stuff on the sides of the street. So there's a lot of things that I've upcycled in this home and have turned into places where I grow my plants. So if you just look up here, you'll see that this is actually an old sled right up here that also houses a little bit more where I can hang my cups or pots and pans and things like that. So there is more of a utilitarian purpose to this rather than just a plant stand. And then you'll notice that I have this, which is just like, you know, some upcycled, recycled pieces of wood that my father hand cut with some rope and some twist ties in order to be able to house this. And then this right back here is a mason jar garden, which has upcycled wood, some hose clamps, Tapcon screws, something really simple. This trellis was thrown out by a store in the neighborhood. It just had a lick of paint and started to grow some plants on that. So these chairs, like all of this was like, these were being given away. My dad picked these up. This table was at auction. We got it for like 30 bucks. So there's a lot in here that has probably given it a little bit more, I would say, like maybe it's a euphemism, but a little bit of more of a charming feel. But that's kind of what makes it feel at home for me. It's harder to have plants in this interior space. So if you have a dark area of your house, you really do have to augment it with lights. And I have this grow light right here, and you can see how all the plants are kind of lifting their leaves in order to be able to get here. But I'm growing plants that are already a little bit more tolerant to low light conditions, because a lot of the plants that you see here are plants that would typically grow on the forest floor in like a subtropical or tropical climate. So you'll notice I have a lot of aglaonemas. Again, these are kind of forest floor plants. Ludicea discolor, this is a type of jewel orchid. It's a type of terrestrial orchid. I have some aspleniums. So these are bird's nest ferns. And you'll notice they have this iconic basket shape because where they typically live is as an epiphyte, which means it's on a tree or some other type of plant. And it has this basket shape because it's collecting all the falling debris that might be coming through the forest canopy. And that's where it actually gets a little bit more of its water and its nutrients. I wouldn't be able to grow even any of these in this interior of the space if I didn't have it a little bit more light in the area. Let's head over into my bedroom. So this area has a little bit more of my green wall. This is actually just basically gutters that have been taken and modified, and the plants are planted in felted pockets. And then this is my closet garden, which it started off as me growing food in my closet. And it was something that somebody else planted in my mind, and I was like, I have to do that. So I ended up putting my clothes in an armoire and getting rid of a bunch of other clothes and started to grow food here. Everything from like sweet potatoes to potatoes, celery, microgreens, lettuce, kale, and it attracted so many different types of plant pests. I mean, unbelievable amounts. I never had white flies, never had mealybugs, had a ton of fungus gnats that I had to deal with. And so that was a really good learning experience. And luckily, pretty soon afterwards, I was able to get a community garden plot and then move some of my food production out there. This eventually just became foliage plants. This is a type of philodendron. These are like little nectaries, which in the wild, these plants will actually develop a relationship with ants. So sometimes they're little sugars that come out that attract the ants, and the ants will be here to actually protect the plant. So there's a lot of things that you could just really study with the plants that you have in your own home, and then kind of be willed into all the interesting stories that they have. My Hoya pachyclada down here is about to bloom. Hoyas have become very popular indoors. And then you can see that I have a lot of upcycling that I've done here with my tea cans. I love tea. So I end up having to recycle a lot of my tea cans, which is wonderful. By the time they start to rust out, I will like transplant them. But I grow a lot of my cacti and succulents in these windows because this is a southwestern exposure. So then I end up growing a lot of the plants that could actually handle that light. And then you'll see outside my window I have an olive tree, an adenium, Nidoscolus actinifolis, which is a type of Mexican spinach or called chayets. I do use my fire escape, which is totally illegal, but I have been using my fire escape to grow some plants. So you kind of have to make do with what you have in the city. And of course my doves, my rock doves out there that like to actually live and sit in my planters sometimes too. So I realize I have to share my fire escape with others. I could just go into my workroom, turn off the camera here. And this used to be a bedroom, and I converted it into a workroom because I do a YouTube channel now. And take a look at how lovely this plant is. It's also known commonly as lizard skin crassula. This is like one of my favorites. And there's all different types of cultivars of these. So there's ones with like tinier little bananas, and there's ones with bigger bananas. This is totally ready to be propagated. And the reason why I say that is it has this long, long stem right here. I find these plants to be very easy to grow. I'm growing them just in basic moderate light. And I can't remember exactly where I first saw Dieffenbachia reflector, but it probably had to be around 2 years ago. I really love these horticultural cristate forms because I think that they, make the plant a little bit more compact. You'll notice I have a little humidifier here for some plants that actually need a little bit more higher humidity. And I noticed that these little Hoyas, I have like Hoya Mini Bell right here, and then which one's this one? I want to encourage people that it's not about how many plants you have, it's about what makes sense for you, what feels right for you. And if you have a really small space and you have just one plant, that might actually be perfect. When I'm planting a terrarium, I like to start with one main plant first and kind of build around it. It's about 2 months of growth from this terrarium, and you can see that the plants are kind of spilling over the edge. I think it was the peperomia that was the only one that was kind of poking out, but look at how this pilea has grown. For me personally, if I find something that's not usually a house plant, I like to be able to bring it closer to myself and be able to observe it and to see if I could actually grow it. I'm going to concentrate on this guy right here, which is this little neon green guy called Rhipsalis carioscula. And I have plants that I really like called Rhipsalis, and they're a type of jungle cactus. I shared with people how about 1/3 of those Rhipsalis are actually either threatened or endangered. There are only around 38 species of Rhipsalis that are known. The crazy thing to think about is that 29 of those species, more or less, actually are endemic to the country of Brazil. And endemic just means that they grow in Brazil and absolutely nowhere else. Now, unfortunately, many of those plants are threatened or vulnerable or endangered or even critically endangered in their native habitats. And you might already know the reason why. And if you don't, I will tell you that much of the forests in those areas of Brazil, which is in the southern part of Brazil, underneath the Amazon River basin, are just being destroyed left and right. So only 1% of that forest, which is part of the Atlantic forest of Brazil, actually remains in this day. So much of that Rhipsalis has probably gone endangered, or in some cases, many of the species could have even gone extinct. We just don't know. But, you know, this is something that I think really resonates with me deeply, being somebody who is a plant lover. And I would hope that at least some of the folks who actually watch that, it resonates with them and they say, oh my gosh, you know, I'm growing this. I'm growing that plant that's actually threatened or endangered. But also that it connects me to these larger issues. And you never know, like maybe somebody who that really resonates with like actually gets involved. So I do think that you could start with something as humble as a houseplant if you're interested and you're curious enough, and it allows you to actually become a much more responsible citizen outside of your home as well. For anybody who gets a plant, I think a lot of folks want to be able to have it survive. And I think one of the important things to be able to do is actually understand where in the space that you have will it thrive. Now I've actually started to say, oh, this bookshelf is a great place for me to actually have plants because of the light. Let me move my books and put plants on there. This is my bookshelf. I've converted it into a place where I could grow more plants. And again, it's because I get some really nice light that comes in here and it allows me to actually grow more plants. You could see that the plants really work out where the light is coming from. So you'll even notice this cissus, which is a type of grape ivy. It actually is growing a little bit more towards the light, so it's not putting any effort of leaves right here, which I wouldn't either if I were this plant, because the light is actually coming from here. So you'll notice that they're trying to move a little bit more into the window space. And then these windowsills are pretty much for my cacti and my succulents. And you could see that when the community garden closed, I actually had a bunch of new plants that I needed to plant outdoors for the space, and they've just been sitting in here, and some of them have not done so well. And it's going to open up in 2 days, so hopefully most of these will actually transition really well. This is a type of fennel. It's actually bronze fennel, but it's lost a lot of its color because it's not in that kind of highlight condition. I actually neglected to say that this is like my hammock, and this is a really wonderful spot just to come and read in. There's lots of places that I really like to come and read. You know, this is one of the places. Over there is another place as well. But I just, I like having a space in my home that just feels very comforting, very comfortable, and that feels like I'm out of the city. Because being in the city can actually be really draining, but creating a home and a community that feels more regenerative, I think is where I like to live, and I think a lot of other people would like to live. Here are some photos of Kippy. I have another one right over here. If you see through the leaves. And then one of the folks who watch my channel actually gave me this little Kippy's garden. So those are like little memories that I have of her. And I even have like some of her feathers around the house. And then this is actually a place where I started some seeds initially, and you can see some of the seeds that I was growing. This is my dill. It's in desperate need in order to be able to actually plant outside, but my community garden opens up in just a couple days, so I'm going to be able to plant them out there. This is my tomato plant that I grew from seed, and I actually grow these under lights. I just started the seed here, and then I actually will plant them up outside. Just like knock this one over. A common hazard when you have lots of plants. Here's where I do my cooking, and you'll see that I have double shelves so I could grow way more plants, and then also my birds out there that keep me company, and which is especially wonderful during the time of sheltering in. One of the things that I want to start up again is my Vermicompost Er. So you can see down here is this little contraption. And up here you could see that you could just basically put, this is a lot of my tea that I had, and this is very dry. You actually have to keep this a little bit more moist if you get your red wigglers. But this is where I could put my food waste, and you could put at least some of your food waste, and then maybe some paper, towels, things like that, that the red wigglers will actually eat. But that's a little bit more of vermicomposting. I would need to really increase the size of my vermicomposting unit in order to be able to deal with all of my food. But then you could see you get a little bit more of some fresh soil underneath there that you could use in your garden or your garden plot, which is kind of cool. Anyone who walks into my home, I think, is a little bit more amazed or in awe because the space feels so calming. It feels calming to me as well. I mean, it's part of the reason why I started to fill my home with plants. And maybe I didn't even articulate that in the beginning, but I always knew, like, oh, this house felt like it was missing something. I felt like I was missing something in the city. You know, having that little space of green to cultivate and call your own is like so important. I almost think it's like a basic human need. But again, you have to do with what you have. So for me, it's very calming. I think it's very much a part of my lifestyle, and you do develop this routine. You know, folks always ask me, well, how do you have like a more sustainable lifestyle, or how do you make these changes? And it's like these little changes that you make every day that become your rituals. And so when I wake up in the morning and I put on some tea, or if I go and water my plants, that all becomes like the fabric of my lifestyle, and that shapes my life on a regular basis. Being able to nurture something, even if you don't have a kid or pets or anything along those lines, but that the fact that you could even nurture a plant is really a remarkable thing. So these plants I just took a little cutting of, and you can see that I have just a little root that's starting to grow right there and right here. A couple little roots right there. So probably in another week or so I could start propagating these back up in soil. But they'll live in this water for quite some time too as well. They're pretty resilient. That's the really beautiful thing about plants, is that so many of them you can vegetatively propagate, which means by taking like a leaf or part of the stem, depending on the plant, and they'll propagate really easily. By just cutting back some of the tips of this, it'll start to bush out a little bit more. So even if you're not going to use it, I mean, I will use this little basil. It's actually, even though it has small basil leaves, they're very, very potent. So this is one of my favorite new cultivars that I started to grow in here. And I'll probably just take some and actually propagate it and then grow it outside as well. And so my plants, shape me as much as I've, probably shaped them in my own home. And that has had massive impacts, and probably ways that I can't even articulate, because I've had them for so long here that I almost can't remember life without them.